So what have we got for you today? Well, the Mirror has splashed on a photograph of Alice da Silva Aguirre, age 9, posing next to a Taylor Swift cutout on the day that she and 2 others were stabbed and killed at a holiday dance workshop in Southport. It was her funeral at the weekend, and if you want to know more about that and how it went, please read today's paper. It's a bit too upsetting, really, for a parent of someone who's about that age to talk about. So inside is, we all saw it happen, but I'm still shocked to say it. One of the consequences of the far-right riots, which were stoked in the wake of those shocking murders. A lady called Maya Amengeldaeva, I think, is a Pride of Britain winner, and she runs a community food bank. Yet somehow the rioters felt she was responsible for what had happened to Alice, if I've got this right. Lizzie, can you take us through this? Because, I can't even...
Yeah, this is a really awful story. So Maya, I think, has spoken to the police about she runs a food bank in Kent and was which was subject to an attempted arson, and that she said she was attacked by 3 masked men. Now, Maya's from Turkmenistan, but has been living in the UK for 15 years. I think is British citizen. But Turkmenistan is a Muslim country, and she believes that she was targeted for this reason. Obviously, it's just a really awful story, and the kind of thing that, that we've seen on the streets over the last few days, and I think is kind of part of the fallout of obviously the anger and the rioting that sort of sprung up in the wake of the Southport stabbings. There's this sort of some of the things that have been bubbling under the surface, these really, really unpleasant sort of criminal acts being committed. And yeah, I think it's a sort of events like this show that there's a lot of work that needs to be done. Now that the immediate the immediate rioting and looting appears, touch wood, to have wound itself down, there's a lot of work that needs to be done on dealing with, racism, bigotry in our society, anti-immigrant sentiment, all of that sort of thing. And that's going to be a huge project for the new government to deal with. Yeah, and
it wasn't something that was in the manifesto. It's not in their big list of things to do, but it's in the intro now, isn't it? There's no way to get around it. And what do you think, everybody? How do you feel about the fact these riots have been over relatively quickly? Okay, normally riots, we've seen them before. 2011, they lasted for a couple of weeks. This has been a couple of weekends, and it's kind of gone. And I think the way it's been handled has been pretty good. But what do you think? Do you think it's been handled badly? Do you think something different should have been done about it? Get in the comments and let us know. Maya is a businesswoman. She lives in Herne Bay. And she seems to have quite a high profile locally because she runs a food bank and a community cafe. And she obviously is quite vocal, I would have thought. And yes, Turkmenistan, where she's from, is a majority Muslim country, but their version of Islam is Sunni, not Shia. It's heavily influenced by traditional folk practices. So it's not even the kind of Islam that, your fundamentalists would really approve of necessarily. And the second biggest religion is Russian Orthodox. We don't know which one Maya might be, but looking at her, she's blonde-haired, brown-eyed. Frankly, I don't care what religion she's got, because she seems like a thoroughly decent person who's an absolute adornment to our country. She's won Pride of Britain for her work. She's obviously helping the local community in Herne Bay, which is one of those sort of left behind coastal areas where you don't get an awful lot of funding or jobs going on. So she's obviously needed. And she's obviously doing well compared to the 3 men who held her down. They called her a dirty immigrant, told her to go back to her Muslim country, probably because they couldn't say Turkmenistan, much less locate it on a map. And they put her in fear of rape, as 3 masked men would do to any woman on her own. Now, Lizzie, one of the things we learned today was that a total of 927 people so far have been arrested over these riots. Don't think these 3 have been found yet, hopefully one day. But despite all the howls of protest from the right wing about Keir Starmer suppressing freedom of speech and so on, the courts, the sentencing, the public in general seem to be showing that that's not all on the same page. The public are very pro this crackdown, and from the people we've seen who've been to court, they weren't out there expressing their freedom of speech, were they?
No, I mean, I think the Prime Minister has made it really clear over and over again that this is a law and order issue, that this is the way that the government is choosing to treat it, that these are not people expressing legitimate grievances. These are people who are going out into their own communities, committing criminal damage, assault, attacking police officers who were there. This all sort of came out after the Southport, the terrible knife attacks in Southport, where 3 young girls were killed, and the police had to intervene there, the emergency services had to intervene there, and all these thugs are doing is sort of attacking people who tried to save the lives of innocent girls. And I think the government has been has very much zeroed in on that point. A lot of people are looking at the pictures that they see on the streets and they're saying, this doesn't reflect the Britain that I know. And all you're doing is looting local businesses, causing criminal damage. Like you've seen, there's quite a lot of mockery of people saying, you think you're some sort of patriot, that you go out on the street to defend us from some phantom enemy, when in fact you're the people who are causing all the damage and causing people to be fearful, attacking police officers. And, so, yeah, I think the public appears to be very much in the space that these are people who are committing crimes, and that's it. It's not a legitimate debate on anything, because as the pictures that you can just see right now, like, I don't know what views those people are expressing that are legitimate.
No, they're chucking, for those who want to know, these are various videos that we're watching now. For those on podcasts, we're watching some videos from the riots last week, which are, in a car park, they're in a street, they're in Middlesbrough, they're in Liverpool, and they're basically just people wrapped in flags, but chucking planks at police officers outside a hotel in Tamworth, chucking a brick in Rotherham, setting bins on fire, basically having a scrap with a bloke behind a riot shield. All of which isn't freedom of speech. And it does seem to be that, when it's these guys that are going to court, people are going to be right bang alongside Keir Starmer and cracking down on that. But the right is very much trying to sort of reverse engineer some of this, isn't it? As a form of cracking down on dissent, suppressing disagreement, that somehow they've tried to blame Keir Starmer for the immigration problems, which since he's been in power 4 weeks is quite a reach. But then when that hasn't worked, they've tried to blame him for being too tough on these people, because some of the sentences are really strong. I mean, the lady that everyone kind of remembers seeing a video of who pushed a wheelie bin on fire at police officers and then fell down flat on her face. She wasn't a rioter per se. She wasn't, a member of the far right. She wasn't supporting those views, but she'd been smoking weed all day, and then just got dragged into it when she went outside, according to the court, and then sort of ended up flat on her face, having done something silly, and very harsh sentences, perhaps, on some people who got innocently dragged in. Does seem a bit hard to some people.
But then you could argue that pushing a flaming bin at somebody has the potential to injure somebody quite seriously. So I suppose, I think you are right that there's certainly an element of what was going on, school holidays, the weather was really hot. There were loads of kids just hanging around. There are lots of people who sort of just came out to see what was going on, got caught up in the kind of, but ultimately, I think, if you're putting people's lives at risk, it doesn't really matter whether, you originally intended to go and cause disorder. If you are there and you've been caught up in it, then everyone's making choices, aren't they? Exactly. And I suppose, the government decided that they had to, this is a sort of quite, Keir Starmer was Britain's top prosecutor during the 2011 riots. And so this was, he's using the same kind of strategies that he used then, that this very tough crackdown, this rushing, getting everything through the courts really quickly, which, the government seems to think has acted as a deterrent. I think it's probably part of a complicated picture, isn't it? But But yeah, the sentences are harsh. They really are.
They seem to have worked on the people who would drift into it sort of by accident, as it were. Now, Steve says, the right says these people have legitimate concerns which should be addressed. It's absurd. Nigel Farage was out on the airwaves at the weekends talking about how, Keir Starmer took the knee for Black Lives Matter, but yet when it came to white working class people protesting, he was sending them all to jail. Not quite the same thing. Some of the that we saw, some of the disturbances on the street from BLM did lead to jail, as far as I can recall, and did lead to problems, but it wasn't quite on the same scale as this. Anyway, Rob says, divide and conquer, reform's number one policy. We'll get on to reform in a little bit, but first off, the bottom of that page about the riots, just want to say, Lizzie, the Justice Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, has been out there saying that the impact of these riots are going to be felt for some time because they've bunged up the justice system. They've put more people in jail just when she was trying to sort of ease up some space pressures. Police and so on have had more to do, just at a time when they're really in need of some reforms, frankly. And this is the same Justice Secretary who said she was going to have to let people out early because of the overcrowding. Now there's more people in prison. How long before sort of the far right really has led to the release of some people that these so-called patriots, we really would rather was not on the streets? It's going to make that far more worse, isn't it?
I think that the situation in prisons is pretty dire. One of the first things that the government did after the election was announce that they were going to have to make changes to early release schemes so that some people will be allowed out of jail after serving only 40% of their sentences. Obviously, there are exceptions to this. I think it's all any sort of sexual assaults, domestic violence, serious assault with a sentence of more than 4 years, I believe. So, there are very, more extreme sentences that this would not apply to. But the prisons are full. There's very few cells left. There have been repeated warnings in recent times about the fact that, prisons are really struggling to cope with the space. Our prison estate is ancient. There's loads of Victorian prisons that just are not fit for purpose. This obviously comes at a really difficult time because the government needs to look tough and says that, needs to say that we're sending people to prison for a long time. But they're going to be in a position where some people do have to be released. And it's not entirely clear whether the rioters could be released early or not. I think it was the business secretary. The business secretary yesterday said, my understanding is that rioters won't have their sentences shortened, but that's quite a sort of slightly mealy-mouthed response, and people have interpreted that in different ways. So we're still kind of trying to get to the bottom of that. The Justice Secretary has sort of suggested that won't happen. But, if you're looking at people who are serving, some of these sentences might not be as long for some of the offences, and so would probably be prime candidates for,
exactly. You've got, say, 3 years for, picking up something out of a broken shop window, as opposed to breaking the shop window or chucking a plank at a police officer or something. You're going to be one of the non-violent opportunist people that they might say, well, it's going to be a bit sticky, that one, as far as new government's concerned. Now, Call-in 6 says those people do have legitimate concerns, mainly poverty. I don't know what your real name is, Call-in 6, but my gran and granddad and my nana and gramps were all very poor their entire lives. And do you know what? They never once put a wheelie on fire and chucked it at the police officers. They never once rioted. They never once chucked a plank at anybody. They just went about their business and, moaned and complained and voted and tried to get change that way. Poverty can be a causative factor in some of this stuff, but it's not an excuse.